Hi, and welcome to Chief or Yourself. I'm happy you can be with us today, wherever you happen to be in the world at this moment. The minute we show up on this planet, we become the lead character in a life story that contains the kinds of twists and turns that you might find in that book that you keep next to your bed, highs and lows, conflict, and important life lessons as well. But have you given any thought to consider what your story is about? Who's writing the script? And why you're playing a role, or how you can use challenges to help you gather strength as you move through the chapters. Our guest today is Kim Schneiderman. She is the author of a book called Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life. Kim also counsels in private practice, writes for a variety of readerships in print and online, and teaches as a professor and guest lecturer at venues including New York University. And Kim, early in the book, we'll get right to it, you write that life is an unfolding story, and I'm sure most of us can go along with and understand that. But what does it mean to step out of your story?
Sure. It means to, well, first of all, I ask readers to imagine themselves as a character in a novel, and then and to find the sort of heroic narrative in the story that they're living. And I do that by asking them to write in the third person. And what that does is it literally gives you the emotional distance to step out of your story so that you can look at it from like a broader, wide-angle lens. So what that means is sort of being able to see how, like in the story, you know, in every story, there's always a protagonist who's trying to accomplish something and an antagonist who gets in the way. And the tension between the two creates an opportunity for the protagonist to develop and grow and work on themselves, right? And it determines how they evolve over the course of the story. So the purpose of my writing exercises is by imagining yourself as a character in a story and then using the third person narrative, you can begin to see how the challenges in your life, both good and bad, can help you, can become stepping stones to, you know, a richer, more developed and evolved version of yourself.
And early on, you suggest the reader or the framer of the story develop a character sketch. Talk about how that works.
Sure. So what I do is basically my book offers a series of structured writing exercises that that kind of walk people through their story. So I begin at the beginning of where stories always begin, which is an exposition where you're introduced to the main author. You're introduced to the main characters and the setting of the story. And what I ask people to do is to get a sense before they begin their journey of self-exploration, which is what my book does, is to get a sense of who they are as a character in the story. So I ask them to do what an author would normally do before they begin writing a book, which is to create a character sketch, where they kind of get a holographic picture of how the character, would evolve throughout the storyline. And I ask people to apply that same idea to their own lives. So I ask questions like, and again, it's you would be asking yourself these questions in the third person narrative, like, what does the hero of your story want in the current chapter, right? What is getting in the way? What's at stake? So who is this character? What do they want? What's getting in the way, and what's at stake? And what that does is it helps people understand what direction they're heading in. Because obviously at the beginning of, I've worked with clients before, and sometimes they come, to me they're stuck in a particular place in their life. And if they were to continue to move forward the way they've always done things, they're not going to really make any changes. So what the purpose of this exercise is to help people take stock and see how they might, to look at where they're heading and how, what they really value in terms of what's the stake of making these changes in their life.
And you mentioned working with clients. I would think that today there's a lot of Well, a lot of pressure with in the job place and people losing their jobs. And when they come to you, what kind of things are you hearing about people losing their job, and how do they get back on the tracks?
Sure. Well, actually, I developed the writing exercises that I developed for the workshop. The that I developed for the book were based on workshops that I did in 2008 for people who had been impacted by the recession. And the reason I offered that, I wanted to give them a sense of their story being larger than the role that had defined them,
Mm-hmm.
in their work life. So, for example, a lot of people felt like, well, who am I if I'm not like, some big stockbroker? Who am I if I'm not this real estate person?
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to do is to give them an opportunity to see that their narrative, that who they are as a character was a lot larger. So, and that how they tell the story of what had happened to them made a difference, because, there's infinite ways to tell a story, right? And we could tell it as a triumph or a tragedy, depending on how we spin it. And some people say, well, does it matter like how you tell your story? And really, it so much does, because how we tell our story, especially to ourselves, affects how we feel about our story, which influences how it unfolds. So, for example, if you tell your story, if you're laid off, and you say to yourself, like, this is just another crappy thing that happened to me in my terrible life, you're not going to have this kind of energy and good feelings that you need to do the work to get another job. But if you can see yourself as a character in the story, and that this is just another twist in your plot, and that if you understand how stories work, which is that every conflict is an opportunity for the character to evolve in some way, then suddenly you can step out of your story and feel like, oh wow, maybe I can use this opportunity to push myself to develop the parts of myself that are not as, to develop my emotional or mental muscles in ways that haven't been developed before. For example, maybe I need to become more disciplined. Maybe I need to be more, have a bit more faith in the universe. Maybe I need to think about whether this is the right career for me. Is it in line with what I really value? And if you can use whatever opportunity, whatever challenge you have in your life as an opportunity to refine yourself in some way, then it really puts you in the author's seat of your story.
Mm-hmm. And all those things you can learn about your life aside from what you do have a tendency sometimes to make people balk a little bit and sort of not really look at their greatness. Is that an egoic thing or conditioning or a combination of those things? What do you think?
Well, I think it's how people value their worth. I think a lot of times people value what I call the external story, which is how things look, on the outside, which is, the thing that if you bump into somebody that you haven't seen in a while and they ask, like, how are you? And you say, well, or what are you up to? And you tell them that your list of accomplishments. Well, I wrote a book and I spoke on the radio, or, oh, I just got a new job, or I just had a child, or, but those things are important. But a lot of times people feel like if they're not doing something momentous, that somehow that they can tell people about, they don't feel so valued. And what my book does is it gives value, it shifts the focus from the external story to the internal story, which is how we experience the subjective story, how we experience things. And valuing things like character development. In fact, I describe my book as a character development workout for people who like to write. So if you can change something, a pattern that you've done your entire life, for example, let's say every time, your child spills milk on the floor, you start screaming. And suddenly one day you decide to take a deep breath and you see the child crying about it, and you give them a hug and you get down on the floor and you clean it up together. You've changed something meaningful about your character. And these are the things that people don't always share and talk about. And they often don't really value those important little subtle shifts that they make in themselves. because maybe immediately it doesn't show results. But what I, but just being able to acknowledge that everyone has that like heroic self, not just like heroic with a capital H, but like that each time that you're able to change a pattern in your life, the way that you think about something, every time that you're able to flip your script in a manner of speaking, that you, and if you're, that you, that that's, that you can be, that you can feel good about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And of course, readers will find out they don't have to be masterful in composition skills. It's really a simple process if you follow it, right?
In the book? Are you talking about
in the book, yeah.
Yeah. The writing exercises?
The writing exercises.
The writing exercises are very simple, and it's not designed. I say that the writing is not like, it's not about writing well, it's really the writing is a tool for self-discovery. And even though I sound, maybe the way I'm describing it sounds a little complicated, people who've actually read the book have found these exercises to be very, very clear and easy to follow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of these concepts are a little bit abstract, but again, like I'm a writer, not a speaker. So when you read the book, you're
not alone.
Sense of like what exactly I'm talking about.
You mentioned heroic scripts, and of course, I'm reminded of the Joseph Campbell phrase, "Follow your bliss," because it seems that's what you did. I mean, you had a sense of the importance of story at a very young age, didn't you?
Yeah, I was kind of a strange kid. I'm very imaginative. Like I used to imagine that I was a character. I read a lot, and I used to imagine that I was a character in the story. I even had this like alter ego called Kim S in Person, which was, I have no idea why I chose that particular alter ego. But that kind of perspective followed me into my life, and I would sometimes when I was like stuck in an old pattern, I would ask myself like, I would kind of take a step back or step out of my story and say, if I were reading about this particular situation in a novel, what would I hope to happen? Like, what would I root for? What decisions would I want the character to make? Or what kind of attitude would I want the character to adopt? What actions would I want, her to take? And then I would even go a little bit deeper and ask myself, like, since I understand that every story has a conflict, and that conflict is designed to help me refine the character, how can I use this challenge or this antagonistic situation, which could be something, by the way, good or bad. I mean, writing a book was a huge challenge for me, and obviously it was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
How can I use this challenge to grow in some way? Like, what is it teaching me? So it was a way of helping, and basically it was a way of looking at life that helped me reframe whatever experiences I was going through in a much more productive way. And, I actually have had, a lot of adversity in the last 10 years of my life.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about one of those incidents in particular about your father, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've had to definitely apply the lens to my own life. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was tested after I had developed writing exercises to help people who had lost their jobs, like, reframe their experience. I lost my dad was actually diagnosed with cancer, and he was the second person. Like, my mother has had cancer for 11 years, and she passed away 10 years ago, and we were very close. And then I had kind of begun to create a relationship with my dad, and then he got sick. And what eventually happened is I had to leave my private practice in Manhattan and go down to Florida to become his hospice caregiver. Mm-hmm. And during the course of taking care of him, this was probably one of the most challenging things that I've ever done. And the hardest thing, we became so close, and a lot of healing took place. To the extent that, like, before he died, he told me that he couldn't believe that he was still, like, learning and growing. And when I asked him, like, what are you learning? And he said, well, people have found a way to love me, and I found a way to love them. Mm-hmm. And that really stuck with me. And so when I tell the story of what's happened to me as I lose both of my parents, and it's sad, it wasn't how I expected my story to unfold. However, I can look at it, I can read that story as a story, tell that story as a story of healing, as a story of, redemption, the prodigal daughter, perhaps. And so there's many ways, there's many ways that I can tell that story, but telling it that way, and it's, and it feels very real to me. It's not like I'm just spinning it, to sound Pollyannish. It feels like that was a really meaningful, I want to embrace the fact that healing related, that healing interaction was a turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's about helping people to find a constructive way to tell their stories.
Well, now, I was wondering, because I had a similar situation in my life with someone close to me, not in the medical caretaker part, but in the business affairs. And I felt quite a bit of resentment early on. I had that feeling of, yeah, I didn't sign on for this. You seem to handle your situation so very well, at least reading about it in the book. Did you feel any resentment? And if you did, how do you get through that?
Well, I have to tell you, I had more spiritual resentment. I was like, at first, I was just like, really, God, and what's going on here? Come on, I lost my mother. It was like 11 years of cancer. And come on, and then my father met someone after my mom died that I grew to love, and then she passed away from cancer. So it was just like, I wasn't so resentful of him. I was just resentful of God or the universe or the higher kind, whatever life was throwing at me, I did. But that's the whole thing. Like the reason, I felt like if I just stayed in resentment, it could just consume me. And I didn't want that to happen. And again, because I look at life, because I sort of reframe my life as an opportunity for me to evolve as a human being, and that I look at life as, the purpose of life as being that. I sort of reframed it as like, okay, if I were reading about this and I could start in this story, like what would I appreciate about the opportunities presenting here for love and for healing and and how can I grow as a person? I feel so much stronger and so much more courageous and so much more compassionate. And I was consciously making a choice about how to handle those things. And that's kind of the point of my book, is that at any moment, it's really, really hard when you're stuck in a crisis situation to get perspective. It's very difficult, and it's not like I'm immune from getting stuck sometimes with feeling resentment or other kinds of negative feelings. Mm-hmm. But you kind of, it takes some work. But if you can step out of your story and you can see that, and if you can look at whatever is being presented in the current chapter of your life as an opportunity to help you evolve, to become a better person, mm-hmm. then that kind of a lens can help you find the silver lining narrative in whatever you're experiencing. And I realize that, that can be harder to do in situations, like in more extreme situations like genocide and other kinds of larger atrocities. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I would want that if I were writing my story, I wouldn't want to put myself as a character in any of those situations. Sure. And I think that there are limits to my perspective, but maybe not. Sometimes you read about these incredibly heroic individuals that survive all kinds of atrocities, and it's because of the way they choose to see their story. It's because of their attitude, which is basically what this is about. It's about the way that they choose to view their life, or the perspective that they have on it is what helps them get through. Even Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, that's what he did. He looked at this as he was, living through the Holocaust. Sure. It was a horrendous experience, but he chose to use it as an opportunity to kind of study the purpose of life. Mm-hmm. And that's not an easy thing to do for anybody. But what my book aims to do is to sort of serve as a guide, so that people can do it, who might not be able to incline like Viktor Frankl, to there are exercises that can help them access, like the voices of courage or the voices of trust or the voices of faith that lie deep within themselves, that might be buried under other voices of resentment or voices of anger and fear.
Yeah. Speak to the reader who says, "Well, I'm casting my life in a positive light, and yet it doesn't feel that way, and this feels kind of dishonest."
Oh, right. Oh, the perspective I'm presenting feels dishonest.
Yeah.
So I've had people say that, like, this sounds a little Pollyannish, and it's kind of like, it reminds me of the parable of the blind man and the elephant. There's so many ways to look at life, and there's no one way is actually true. And so I'm less concerned with whether something is, a true story than whether it's a constructive story. And I think, and also, there's room, like, this is not about whitewashing or glossing over painful experiences. So after losing my father and during the process of caring for him, had a tremendous amount of pain. And I still have pain of sadness and grief when I think about, the losing both of my parents. So this is not about glossing over.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at your life as a story, every story has room for these kinds of experiences. It has room for the positive emotions and the negative emotions, the positive experiences and the negative experiences. And that you can actually, there are all kinds of studies that show that people who look back at their experiences in the third person narrative, which is, I think, lends itself to the story perspective,
mm-hmm.
Tend to look at themselves as having overcome obstacles, as opposed to when they look at themselves in the first person, which is, more like an I, like me. When we talk about ourselves in the me or the I, we tend to be very egocentric. But when we can sort of, but again, like, so looking at yourself as your life as a story, the more that you allow room for both the good and the bad, but can still value the character development that happens over the course of the plot line, I think the more that you approach the truth, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm. And it's a subjective approach, really, isn't it? It's not so much about getting the facts in order. It's about what you're taking away as far as meaning.
Absolutely. So thank you. So there's I like to talk about that there's an inner story and an outer story, and that the outer story is kind of like the facts of how, like, again, as I was talking about before, like the things that happen to you. The inner story is how you experience them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have very little control over the outer story, what happens to us. But we always have control, or almost always not the greatest word to use, but usually we have control over the inner experience, our subjective experience, and how we choose to interpret that event. And the subjective way, the inner experience for a story, the way we feel about it, the way we experience it affects, but how we feel about our story affects, how we tell our story affects how we feel about our story, which can affect how it unfolds, for reasons like I explained earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That if you tell your story of a cancer diagnosis as an opportunity for you to, get clear about who you really value and develop, like, a stronger. Like my mother had through 11 years of cancer, even though it was just that horrible thing that she was diagnosed, and I wish she hadn't been. She really did look at that diagnosis as an opportunity for her to really get a lot stronger in herself and work on, get clarity about what's really important to her. And I think that, she worked a lot on her marriage to my dad during that time. So I think that she really valued the transformation that became possible because she had cancer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes lots of sense. That's a great story. I really enjoyed reading about that part because so much of it hit home for me as far as dealing with parents and end-of-life issues and things like that. and learning a lot about myself in the process. Where will we find you on the web? Where's your website?
Sure, it's stepoutofyourstory.com.
Okay, and we can learn more about the book there, get the book, and also read blog posts there.
Yes, absolutely. And I will be, I will be doing a book signing in the Bay Area in Oakland, California, at Barnes & Noble in Emeryville on Thursday, July 30th.
All right.
And for people that are interested in attending a workshop, and actually, this is where, again, writing the book was based on a series of workshops that I've done at the 92nd Street Y and the JCC in Manhattan. And I will be doing a workshop again at the JCC in Manhattan on October 25th.
All right. The book is Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life, from our guest, Kim Schneiderman. Kim, thanks so much for writing a book that really is a great help in letting us take a good, honest look at ourselves. And I mean honest as far as our own truth is concerned. And I think that's long overdue. So thank you for that. And do come back and visit us again. I'd like that.
Thank you so much for having me.